Yeah, so let's talk about things. So you wrote a book recently. Has this been produced or published? It's out.
Yeah, I wrote one book that was published last September and one that was published this September. So
Wow.
two out on the street. Um, yeah, it's been an interesting ride because it's not my background. I did it to try to help and provide some sanity for people if I could. Um,
Yeah.
just kind of spread the message of what has worked for me.
Good. So that was and I think a lot of us are getting into that field where we just want to help and what can we do to offer. So what was that process like for you? Like let's talk about your first book. What was that process like? Like how did you determine what should go in, what shouldn't, how to frame it, or did you just stream of conscious just pop it out and you were done?
Well, the beginning was I have a an interesting past that includes addiction and dysfunction and risk taking and losing and winning and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I wanted to write something that had to do with my experience
Mm.
rather than an advice or a how-to sort of book. So the first one's more along the memoir lines, I would say. And
Yeah.
I got sober back in 1985. So I've been doing things roguely for a long time. After I was doing them more as a rogue kid. But anyway, so I was relaying one of the stories of my youth to my wife, who met me after I was already 20 years out of all that madness. And she kind of looked at me as I tell her stories, and she did this a few times. She's like, "You're just not that guy anymore. Like that's not
Mm.
you. I don't see it. I don't. And I said, yeah, I agree. It's not me anymore. And I said, remind me to write a book someday. And that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
Um, and so I pecked away at it, if I probably wrote three paragraphs in the intervening 18 years. And then COVID happened. We decided, we sold a business, we sold some property stuff, and we said, you know what, we're gonna just do things differently. And so we moved, and I decided that writing this book was something I just needed to do. And so within about 3 months, the first book was written, and and I just kept going, which turned into the second book. So
Nice.
all based on my experiences and all based on the lessons that I've learned. So the material was there. It was just a matter of recalling, some of the stories and some of the craziness, which I was able to do. So that's
Yeah.
the
Good.
advent.
Good for you. I mean, I feel like those are the best books anyway, the ones where you talk about your personal experiences and overcoming adversity. That's what people gives people hope that it can happen to them too. Like the people that have made it and doing good, it wasn't because they were blessed with a gifted life and everything just laid out in front of them. Most of them had to go through some massive adversity and overcome that to put them in the position to be where they're at. And so I like that you spent your time to sort of share that story of yours to give hope to others.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's become just sort of a calling or purpose. I went through life and I came from a very blue collar background in the Midwest and nothing terrible that I recall, but it was an interesting place and situation to grow up in. And when I decided to change my life, I wanted to experience some success in my life and have a little money and do all those things. And so I got into the business world and some circuitous route. It's all in the book. But that was kind of how I started going down a different road. And then, I had to find out how to do all that stuff because my dad was a mechanic and the rest of my family was, either police officers, firefighters, like that sort of thing. So So it's been interesting. It's been a cool journey. The whole book thing, I am not, it's not something I'm it's not something I just said, oh, I'm going to write a book someday. And I grew up wanting to be an author. I didn't. I didn't grow up wanting to be anything. Truly, like I just wanted to, and then I got it together in my life, and it still wasn't a purpose for me. And now that I've written these books, that has become my purpose, if that makes sense. It's kind of been
Yeah.
a cool transition.
No, it's good. And it's interesting because, and I don't know what your experience with this is, but I think a lot of people feel like if I just put out the book, that's it. But that's not it. Now you've got to publish it, you got to get it out there, you got to sell it, you got to hustle it. Like then there's this whole other side to it, all in the name of purpose and help. But there's just, unless you find a publisher and then they're going to take theirs, it's just a whole nother side besides the creative process. So it's almost like you have to use both sides of your brain. You have your creative process of creating your masterpiece, but then it's like getting it out there. That's a whole nother beast that is completely almost opposite of the creative process to some degree.
I agree. It kind of sucks sometimes that,
Yeah.
that it does because I had some good things happen in the business world and that sort of thing, and it was a steep learning curve, and they kind of pulled me out of doing farm work and carpentry, and I got into the business world, and it worked. It took a long time, but it worked, and I don't know how to do the book thing.
Yeah.
I'm about a year in, and they're selling, and it's all good, but it's I can have the personality of, look, I just want to make this happen in the biggest way possible. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot of learning,
Yeah.
just
Yep.
what to do, because
Yep.
I've thrown money down so many holes in terms of the whole book thing. It's
Yep.
it's uh, it's a little crazy.
It is. And also timing wise, I think a lot of people during the pandemic pivoted towards that. There's so many people that I know that put out books during that time and are still putting out books. So you're also dealing with a somewhat saturated market of
Mm.
self-help and, entrepreneurship and overcoming like that in itself is like you said, you're self-taught, but there's a learning curve. So if you're self-taught, like teaching yourself and then getting that product, it's a difficult task for sure.
It is. I've actually thought about, trying to hunt down a publisher because I self-published both books, and I thought, does it make sense to try to? Because I'm not in it for the money. I'm just in it to get the book out there. That's
Yeah.
really what I want to do, is just get it into people's hands, and people of all ages, but particularly young people. Since I was 19 when I started to straighten myself up, and that's been a lifelong process, but how can I help young people maybe not go down those roads? And that's really what I want to achieve, to the extent that that's possible, to get books in people's hands.
So let's talk about that. You mentioned that you overcame addiction. How did you, first of all, how did you end up on that path when you have family who are firefighters and policemen and all this? It seems like there's some pretty uh, authoritarian type of people surrounding you. So how do you end up in addiction and how do you overcome that?
It's uh, my family was, as far as I know, all cool. I mean, it was a strict environment, it was a disciplined environment, all that sort of thing. Kind of what you would expect. My dad was a Navy veteran, but then he became a mechanic, and then my brother was a cop, my grandfather was a cop, my other grandfather was a firefighter. So
Yeah.
it was an interesting upbringing, and for whatever reason, and I don't know why, and I've been, I've noodled it for the last 40 years in terms of, okay, what happened? Why did I go down that road? But I don't know that there is an answer, and I don't know that there necessarily needs to be an answer. The answer that I needed to come up with was, how do I straighten up? So
Yeah.
I think my story is fairly typical. I started drinking at 13 years old, and it was probably like most people do around that age. And that was when I sort of got my first drink, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And for some reason, I just felt like, wow, I want to do this again, and I want to keep doing this. And and it escalated to drugs and to then harder drugs and getting in trouble. I certainly was did a lot of crime type stuff, mostly petty stuff that I should be in jail for, and some of it not quite so petty. And I never was put in jail, which was very interesting to me. Probably would
Is
have
that is
voted.
that because of your connections, or you just happen to escape
Just
us?
it was a small town,
Yeah,
and I got caught doing a bunch of stuff, but all the police sort of knew me,
yeah.
sheriffs in that place, and or at least knew who I was. Like, oh, there's that Dittmer kid. He's doing whatever he's doing, and
Well,
so
and you
for
can
what.
expect that from dumb teenagers. It's like, okay, don't do that again. Okay.
Right, right, exactly, and my mom was really sort of on my tail in terms of, she was going all sorts of mothers against, you know,
Mm,
drugs
mhm,
or drinking or drunk drive, whatever it was, just she was she was on my tail, and at one point, because it was just my relationship with my family was terrible. I was not the person that I grew up learning to be,
mm,
was not the person that I wanted to be, and I just had this incredible friction inside of me to where um, there was one night. It was actually New Year's Eve, a couple days before I went into treatment, and I was at this party, and there were, I don't know, a couple hundred people there probably, and I remember feeling like I've never felt so lonely and just full of turmoil. And I wasn't sure that I still wanted to be on the planet. So
mm,
that was a big turning point for me. A couple days later, I was in a treatment center, drug and alcohol treatment center for 30 days, inpatient.
mhm,
And the two things I got out of that, honestly, were one was hope, because I saw people that kind of had it together, who had done many of the things that I'd done, and they were smiling, and they seemed to feel good, and they seemed to have some peace.
yeah.
And the other thing I got was I got introduced to the 12 steps, and that was something that really helped give me a direction in my life from the perspective of living from more of a principled perspective.
Nice. So in your book, I assume you talk about that. What are some of your key like premises, or what are some of the teachings that you have in the book that could be beneficial to anybody that's listening that you've experienced and shared?
There's a couple things that I think are incredibly important, and I've seen this with I've worked with, I'm going to say, hundreds of people who have been suffering from addictions of many sorts, drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And and I think the first thing that needs to happen, and one of the things I talk about in my book, and everybody's got a different sort of tier of where that happens, or a different level of where that happens, but we have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. We have
Mm,
to be done with I'll just call it the BS, from ourselves that we're giving ourselves, because it's all about my relationship with my world and with me. And if I don't have a good relationship, or I'm not treating myself well, I'm not treating other people well. And that's just how it works. When I treat myself well, I treat other people well. And there's so many things, but the willingness to do the work to find a different life and a different way of handling ourselves, that's something that's incredibly important. And learning over time that it's not about whether or not we're having good experiences or bad experiences, because everybody's going to have all of those their entire life. Good things happen, difficult things happen. It's about how we teach ourselves to respond,
yeah.
and how we handle ourselves, and the person that we put on the street every day. Who am I bringing to the world every day? And that's an incredibly important question to ask ourselves. Is it someone that I'm happy about and I'm proud of, and I can interact with others and help other people, that sort of thing. Is that what I'm putting out there every day, or am I putting out someone who's closed and angry and, you know, spiteful and all of those sorts of things? And I've been on both sides of that. So I've done both. So those are a few of the things. There's some specific lessons and some stories that I'd love to, share at some point in terms of how I, uh, kind of like the top five. I won't tell five, but kind of like the top five things you remember in your life, that
Yeah.
may have happened 30, 40 years ago, and it's like, wow, that still hits me like it did back then. So
Yeah.
it's a little taste of, I guess, what goes on in my first book.
Well, I like that because I feel like those of us who've overcome addiction or different adversity, there's a purpose for doing the work. There's something that's happened, and now that gives you the opportunity for self-reflection and therapy and all the things. Whereas, have you not experienced a whole lot of adversity or things in your life, things have gone pretty smooth. Not saying that those individuals, I mean, lucky for them, but there hasn't been that opportunity to force them into, I need to change, I need something better. It's like everything's good, so I don't need to do that kind of work, and that's not their lot in this life. For a
Mm.
lot of us, that is our lot. Like, for me, I had to blow it up and rebuild it over and over to go, oh, okay, that's what I was supposed to get out of that. And then change those ways, step out of that pattern of doing the same things over and over and expecting different results and blowing up our lives.
For sure. I mean, yeah, it's interesting because, and I people have asked me about addiction and to whatever it is, and have I been addicted to other things, beside drugs and alcohol and whatever. And of course, work and nicotine and whatever, relationships. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can be addicted to, but what am I doing? And you said it, stop doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. What am I doing to change how I'm being in terms of those things? And that's really where the work comes in for me, because I have an extremist personality, and I have a mind that just can go and go and go, and I have to intentionally change how I present to the world and the things that I do, in terms of my habits and treating myself well, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Those are things that are all very important to me having a well-rounded life where I don't have to get sucked into that insanity. And if I do start to go down a road like that, whether it's, being too crazy about work or selling books or whatever it is, I can stop myself,
Yeah,
and I can say, "Hey, man, settle down. You're good." And it's important to be able to do that, because that's not an easy thing to do. It takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes, like you said, it takes going through some adverse things to understand that there's a different way and a better way, and even a way that I would say is significantly better from what I've found, than maybe had I not gone through all that stuff.
absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because you bring up the different types of addictions, and obviously I see it in my line of business all the time, but I think there's so many things that people, maybe because it's not drugs or alcohol, they don't realize there's still different types of addiction in their life, like retail therapy. And the more I'm learning, like, about the chemicals that get produced in the brain, this is a big part of why people end up addicted, because they're really addicted to that feeling, that feel good emotion. So whatever it is that can give them that emotion, they can become addicted to. And so for a lot of people, maybe that's not drugs and alcohols, which are the obvious addictions with the detrimental side effects, but there can be other things in their lives that are creating that feel good, but maybe they don't have the best things, but because they're not destroying their lives over it, it goes sort of unnoticed and people aren't aware that this is happening in their lives.
True. Yeah, it can be interesting unless we have, consequences are really what,
Right.
and that's part of the sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? We have to get to that point where we're willing, and that's kind of what I go into in my second book is we're
Hmm.
all looking for happiness and contentment, great relationships, peace of mind, meaning or purpose, and financial security and other things. But what have we been doing to try to get there? And is it working? And do we need a change in our trajectory? Do we need to look at something? How have I been trying to move forward? And do I need to think of a better way or figure out a better way to do it? And that's the big question, right?
Yeah. You brought up, handling the four areas of our lives. Are you, and physical being one of them, are you big into diet and exercise? Is that a component of your life?
It is, except during the holidays.
I hear you
uh,
on that, boy. We went to a 49er game on Sunday and I ate
oh,
the worst, best food. And I can like see the inflammation, when you got your diet real dialed in and then you let yourself have a cheat day, boy, for me, I could just see it instantly. It's kind of comical.
I'm the same way. I do. I intermittent fast. I normally do 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then my wife and I allow ourselves a little cheat on the weekend, which would be like popcorn or something like that with
Yeah.
you know. But then the holidays come and Thanksgiving, you're like, oh, pumpkin pie and pecan
Uh,
pie and whatever else,
my
like
favorite meal of the year. Yeah. Cranberry sauce,
seriously.
like all the things, the
Yeah.
rolls, you name it.
Yeah, it's the best. It really is. And
Yeah.
I love the holiday, but I love the food. And then I try to, extend it a little bit. Like, okay, well, let's continue to screw up. But it's fine. I give myself permission to do it.
Yeah.
And that's okay at this point in my life. I learned that I can't be too stringent all the time on myself because that creates just as much misery as the
Yeah.
other way,
Yeah.
and so I have to allow myself some grace, and I do that. So physically for sure, and the exercise thing has been important for me for a long, long time, and I do 5, 6 days a week of ensuring that I exercise, and I also ensure that I take a day off.
That's good. Yeah, I like what you hit on there because I've been the same way, like especially when I first got into exercise and diet. I was so stringent about it. It was almost like fear driven because I was afraid if I slipped once, if I had one cheat meal, if I did something, if I didn't go to the gym, all those wins and gains and progress are just gonna go away. And it's like that little fat girl in me just got so like nervous because I worked so hard and all I could think is you're going to throw it all away. Kind of like addiction, all or nothing, all or nothing. And it's taken me a few years to like really not only give myself those grace and realize like one cheat meal is not going to derail all of that hard work. But again, it takes time and working through that process and giving yourself grace and then enjoying that grace when you're in it and not feeling the guilt and shame about it the day after, which I've also been infamous for, is giving myself the grace and then feeling guilty and shameful about it.
Mm.
And that's not good either. Those vibrations are so low, those tones are so low that it's important for us to, when you give yourself grace and then have trust that you can bring it right back in when you need and want it.
For sure. Yeah, so critical, and part of the title of my book, When I Stop Fighting, part of it is
Mm.
to stop that madness of wrestling with myself all the time, and
Yeah.
wrestling with life. And I it's interesting because I find that when I stop wrestling so much with myself, like kicking the crap out of myself for, giving myself permission to do
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
life gets more difficult if I keep beating myself up. And
Yeah.
it gets a heck of a lot more smooth if I'm, one of my favorite words in the English language is allow. If I allow some things and I allow myself to be imperfect, and I allow myself that grace.
I like that. Same, and it is something that's learned, and I'm grateful to for myself to have learned those lessons. I mean, I still can fall victim to it, but I can snap myself out of it pretty quickly. But again, this is something that just takes time. It takes learning those lessons. It takes getting that security and messing up and realizing you didn't throw everything away by having, one cheat meal. Like it is a process of learning to trust yourself again as well.
For sure. Yeah. And there are things as we go that just don't fit anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty cool thing to observe in life. It's been cool to observe in my life. Sugar was something that I
Mm.
never thought like, oh, I'm a sugar addict or anything like that. But there were times when I'd be eating jelly beans and I'd eat some jelly beans every day. And at some point I'm just like, man, what's going on? Maybe I was a sugar addict, but it's and I can see it or I could see it in my health and that sort of thing. And so I basically just knock sugar out of my life. The sugar that I have, and I don't eat processed foods really almost at all. But certainly not, candy or anything like that, or chips or soda or anything like that. And those are things that can just drop off over time, and it's pretty cool. When you're 30 or 40 or 35, we'll go 35, you can do whatever you want, and still be okay in terms of, all right, it might take a little longer to knock some of this excess away, but it doesn't take that long. And then you get into, older than that, and it gets more difficult, and things have to go away,
Yeah.
because that's the only way we're going to truly be healthy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really, like you said, when you reach those olders and you've gone through all that, is you can sort of play that tape forward. Like, yes, absolutely, I can have that. It's going to feel good. It's going to take good, but it's probably going to take me a week to get back to this body over that one meal. I got this coming up, that coming up. Now I can weigh it, pros and cons. Is it worth it to me? Yeah, I'm going to do it. Or no, it's really not. Let me find a substitute where I still feel good about myself, but it's not going to create the same effect. But then you can actually make those good judgment calls and not reactively or impulsively make bad decisions that you then have to figure out how to come back from.
Right. And that's a terrible feeling, having to come back from some of that stuff.